Hi there, Matt Wade here, and today we're going to talk a little bit about Microsoft Whiteboard, which is useful for taking notes, brainstorming sessions, and you can even use it to present during a Microsoft Teams meeting. So let's just dive right in. All right, so Microsoft Whiteboard is a whiteboarding tool that comes with your Office 365 account. It's great for taking handwritten notes, adding stickies, adding text, drawing, sketching, inking, all of that kind of stuff. Very, very useful. It's something that's available to you directly from the waffle in your Office 365 account. Just go to office.com and you can access it directly from your browser. It's also accessible from a number of other devices. Today's going to be very demo heavy. I just want to show exactly how you can use it a little bit, and then also show how it integrates within Microsoft Teams and how you can use it to present especially some handwritten demonstrations, or maybe you're giving a lesson or teaching a class, and use that both by showing, let's say, that content in your face at the same time during your Microsoft Teams meeting. So today I just want to give you an idea of what devices I'm using and what apps we're going to be using. I will be using Microsoft Whiteboard mostly, but Teams will pop up once in a while, although not really a whole lot. I am, yes, let's say the entitled millennial here with a bunch of devices in front of me. I'm going to be using the browser version of Whiteboard a lot, but I'm also going to be using the iPad version of Whiteboard. So Whiteboard does have an iOS app, which means it's available both on iPad and iPhone. So you can access it there. So let's just jump in right now, and I'll give you a brief overview of what Whiteboard is, and I'll show it to you from the vantage point of both the browser version, and I'll do some work on it directly from the iPad at the same time. So if we jump in, looking at me from the computer side of things, if I jump directly into Whiteboard here, you can see that I've been using Whiteboard from the browser. You can actually look at this. This is just a full screen version of Google Chrome, but you can see in the top left I have the Office 365 waffle, and Whiteboard is available in my list of apps. If you don't see Whiteboard here, just click on the list of all apps and it will be there if you have the correct license for it. And again, just to get to this is office.com. Log in with your work or school account and you'll have access to it. So Microsoft Whiteboard is actually available via a bunch of different devices. Incredibly, it's not available the same way in all of the devices. And in this case, I'm actually going to use this and make some updates directly from my iPad. So I'm going to be using this with an Apple Pencil. You could also do it from an iPhone. You could use your finger on either device if you wanted to. I will say the pencil works a lot better. It's kind of like using your finger or your mouse to draw or assign your name. It's a little bit clunky using that as a stylus. The pencil works better. This will also work if you wanted to use, say, like a Surface notebook. You could also use a Chromebook and use, if that has a touch screen, you can use your finger. But in this case, I happen to be using some Apple products. So I'm going to open up Whiteboard from my home screen here, and you can see that I have a bunch of whiteboards that are here, and I can open up one, let's say, that already exists. This happens to be the whiteboard that I have opened on the browser. So they look the same, except weirdly, the browser version uses this handwriting font, and the iOS version, for whatever reason, uses a Helvetica or Arial style, let's say a non-serif or a sans serif font. Right now, Microsoft Whiteboard is available actually natively on Windows 10, and you can also get it for iOS. It comes natively in Microsoft Teams, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, and the browser. Now, I put these in a specific order, and I'm actually going to mention this here. You can bring this up as, let's say, we'll talk about more features, because incredibly, these don't all have the same amount of features. So the Windows 10 app is actually the most feature-rich version of Microsoft Whiteboard. So if you actually want to get the most benefit out of Whiteboard, you may want to use the Windows 10 version. And like, let's say you're presenting in a Microsoft Teams meeting, or you want to share that kind of information, you want to use this in Windows 10 and share that information, or share that Whiteboard in a Microsoft Teams meeting. I wouldn't use necessarily the one in Teams. The one in Teams is actually not as feature-rich as the one in Windows itself. So you'll notice that real quick, as I made updates live on the iPad version, I'm logged into my account on both the browser and the iPad version. So you saw all the updates that I just made with my written text showed up in the browser version as well. So I could be presenting the version from my browser in Microsoft Teams while I make updates and sketches and write in the version from my iPad. So another thing I'll point out here is I can put the iPad back down onto its cradle and I can type in here. One thing I will point out, and like I mentioned, the different apps that you can access this through, or the different devices. One thing is Android is not necessarily supported, and I don't know about a roadmap item that's out there, so laughs in iOS. This is something you want to keep in mind. That being said, you can always access this on an Android or Chromebook device using Google Chrome or Edge or whatever browser you want to use to access this kind of thing. So if I add this, you can see that kind of thing. The other big thing is going to be what kind of features do I have. So from my iOS device, you can see the toolbar has a bunch of different colors. It has a bunch of different pens. It has a highlighter, eraser, ruler. I can also add in, I can paste things from my clipboard. I can add images. That's where this the logo came from Microsoft Whiteboard. I can add notes. I can even create a new whiteboard from a template. And I can add brainstorming Kanban boards, retrospective, a couple things, SWOT analysis if you happen to know strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, that kind of thing, which is actually pretty cool. So that's kind of nice to have. And you'll notice this toolbar looks a lot different than the one in the browser, which also looks different from the one in Teams, and that's because the features are different. If you want to play around with some of the colors or some of the other features, hop into the little black box here. You can change the thickness of your lines. You can change the colors. It's not perfect. You don't have a whole bunch of opportunities here. I'm not sure why they offered us these different rainbow things before you would provide something else, but I think one of the bigger ones about, or the bigger features about this is going to be about sharing and when can you offer new information or bring people into this and be able to learn something or use it to present. So let's talk about that a little bit. So let's talk about sharing, and from here I'm going to just use this little rainbow thingy that they offer for whatever reason that they do. And let's add a little table here, and we're going to be talking about sharing. So there's two different really types of sharing that are really important when it comes to this kind of concept. The first is going to be collaboration, and that means multiple people editing the files or the whiteboard at the same time. So that's like a brainstorming session. People want to add their ideas, do whatever they want, multiple simultaneous editing. Very powerful in that situation. The other is going to be presenting. This is more for like a class. You want to be going over notes, you want to be sending or going over, let's say, math equations of proof, problems, that kind of thing with your students. This is a really good way to do that. So from the collaboration side of things, let's say I want to simultaneous editing. I want something like invitations, share via link. But really, the big thing about this is that this is a free-for-all. Right? Everybody has access to all of this. So this is important to know that this is all one big free-for-all. And let me make that a little bit bigger. Yeah, that's better. Free-for-all. So if we go over to presenting, this is more of one person shares good info, hopefully good info. And this is more like what I'm doing right now, right? I'm responsible for the content that I'm sharing. You can't change it. I'm also responsible for any mistakes that I share, that kind of thing. This would be generally through, Microsoft Teams, let's say. And let's say this is, we'll call this safe. And we'll highlight that too. When we're talking about Microsoft Teams, and let's jump in here and grab the purple for Teams. If I talk about this, this would be more like share screen, and then share a whiteboard. In this case, it's more like share screen, and then you have a whiteboard up already in your browser, or on Windows 10 or on an app someplace else that you want to share, and then share your screen or your window. And then you now have a protected version because the person can't go in and grab that information. So let's extend this line down. And that's essentially, you know, what we're looking at from this perspective. So when you go into Microsoft Teams and you want to discuss a whiteboard and share a whiteboard, each meeting has its own whiteboard, assuming you create it. So if I go back into my list of whiteboards on both of my devices here, you'll see one of them is listed already. It's called Whiteboard Meeting. It says it was edited a little bit earlier this morning. And that is associated with a meeting. You don't see a whiteboard associated with a meeting until somebody in that meeting goes into the share pane and then opens up the whiteboard and goes to share it. That creates the whiteboard. That whiteboard is now available to all of the people, all of the participants in that meeting. And that's important because that means they're in that free-for-all situation. Now, that would exclude, I think, external folks. I think guests are included in that. So if you've invited them in as guests into the Teams organization and you invite them that way, I believe they have the ability to do that. But external people, I don't believe do. That's something you'll want to confirm for yourself, perhaps do a little bit of testing. When it comes down to, I want to just share one for people to see, that's when you would go through and say, hey, create a new whiteboard, and maybe this is something where you call this, you know, your physics notes for whatever today's date is. So create a new whiteboard, give it a name. You can change the name by clicking on the menu on the whiteboard here, and this little pencil here lets you change the name of the whiteboard itself. And then one of the features you have on, again, in the iOS app has significantly more features than the browser app. If you go into settings, and I'll go into both so you can see how different they are, you can export this as an image. A PNG is sort of the standard because then you can just kind of copy and paste it or save it or share it very easily. That would be how you could potentially export it. So, you know, I come from the realm of STEM. I, you know, got degrees in civil engineering, took a lot of physics, a lot of math, a lot of calculus, all that kind of stuff. Some of my best professors, actually, when we went through all of the classwork, they provided the notes that they did. I'm old enough that a couple of my professors did this on overhead projectors using those clear transparencies, but they would take those and then photocopy them and then make those photocopies available to everybody. In fact, he would hand out very thick reams of paper to everybody. Huge waste of paper. But if he had taken that, scanned them, and then made them available to us, you know, in a OneNote that was well organized and just made the OneNote available to all of us, oh my Lord, would that have been amazing. Oh, I would have loved that. But you could definitely do that with this, where during the class, you make those notes available, or you take those notes, go through everything you need to do. At the end of the class, you export this as a PNG, or on the iOS app, you can also do it as an SVG. If you're not familiar with SVG, that is an image type that's scalable, so you can make it as large as you want and it doesn't get blurry. And then you can paste it into OneNote or into Word or into some other you know, file storage area where a student could go find it and see it for as long as they need to. And in a lot of, you know, in a lot of learning situations, it's not so much about getting the answer, it's about following the steps correctly and applying those to new problems. And that's the way, at least for us, it was within the engineering organization. I think the answer is worth like 2% or 2 points, no, 2 out of 10, 20%. See, I can still math. So I think the answer was worth only, you know, a fifth of the actual total points of the question. So that worked out that the problem or the process was much more important for us. So being able to have that and go back to it was just a lot more important. So anyway, I think it's you know, very useful for you to be able to take this information, pull it back, and drop it into, you know, wherever you want to. So that is a reasonably short overview of Whiteboard. I didn't want to get into too much of the details of what the features are because they change so much and because they're so different between the different devices. But really what it comes down to is get into Whiteboard before you want to use it and start playing with it. See what it does and put it to work before you really want to start getting people using it. And then when you do use it, say in a meeting, maybe you're in a remote meeting and you want to use it for brainstorming, discuss during that meeting how people want to use it to get things done. Maybe they want to use sticky notes, they want to use a Kanban board template, they want to take notes or sketch or, you know, mind map, you know, do all that kind of stuff. That is available to you directly in this app, and it's all going to be stored centrally within Office 365. And each of these whiteboards is going to be available to you and shared or stored accessible to you the way that it should be. So if you created it just for you, it's only available to you. If you shared it through the Microsoft Teams meeting, there's only that one meeting whiteboard. Everybody in that meeting should have access to it. Now there's no way to organize these yet. I think they're actually organized and ordered based on the most recently edited, but I'm sure that's coming, and hopefully soon enough we'll see an Android app version of this. But that being said, you always have the browser available to you on pretty much all devices. You just have to figure out how best to use your finger or the browser and your mouse to best use it. So hopefully you found this useful. A like and a subscribe is always appreciated, and happy inking and happy sketching and happy mind mapping with Microsoft Whiteboard, Microsoft Teams, and all the rest of Office 365.